As I mentioned, there are two ways to use Cognito in your application, OAuth and SDK. So before starting with OAuth, let's understand why we need OAuth and what is the workflow in OAuth. And also we will understand what are different OAuth grant types, and then we will go in detail what is JWT, what are JWT tokens, and how they are used with OAuth workflow. So why we need OAuth? So traditionally, this is how we used to do authentication. Here we have this user and this is user's browser. Let's call it client. So if a client wants something from server, let's say example.com, then first client will pass username and password to the server, and server will validate. And if it's valid, then server will create a session token, store the session token in database, and return that session token back to the client. And client will store it in its own storage, maybe in cookie. And from second time, if a client make call to server again, like if client make API call to get list of to dos, it will also makes you to pass session token. And when session token arrives in the backend, it will just check its database that session token is present or not, and corresponding to that session token, what are values there. Like if it's e-commerce site, there might be some items that are added there in cart. So those details will be mapped as part of session token, and if session token is valid, then necessary response are returned to the client, which is user's browser. Now imagine a bit complex scenario where I want to store my to-dos in my Google Calendar and schedule on certain date. So in that scenario, what I can do is that I can pass my Google password to this web server, and trust it that it will create calendar events on my behalf. And also I need to trust that it will forget about my details once it's done. But there are many websites on internet, and we can't trust all websites. So our traditional flow of user password and session token is not a good idea to use in this scenario. So to deal with scenario like this, we can do in this way. What we can do, we can instead of passing Google details to web server, what we can do, we can initiate request to save to Google Calendar, and that third party website or example.com can ask us to go to google.com and bring something that can be utilized to talk to Google Calendar APIs, and it can redirect us to google.com. Then we go to google.com and ask Google to take our username and password, and in return give us something which have limited time validity, and can be used to talk to resource server or Google's APIs, in this case Google Calendar API. So Google will return JWT tokens, access and ID token, and then these tokens can be passed to web server, and then web server can use that same token to talk to google.com regarding calendar. And once calendar events are created, it can just let the client know that event is successfully created. What benefit here is that we are actually never passing our Google's username and password to this third party example.com web server. Actual authentication is always happening at google.com. Also, whatever details we are passing this JWT token to example.com, they have limited time validation. So after some time, this token will expire and Google will no more accept them. So once our task is done, this token will expire after a certain period of time. Also in future, if google.com wants to enhance its security and implement multi-factor authentication, it can implement here. And the example or workaround that we saw here is simplified version of OAuth. Now let's go down here and see OAuth workflow in detail with proper terminologies and examples. So in OAuth 2.0, we have these four important entities: resource owner, which is us, user, and client. So client is the entity which will interact with authorization server, and authorization server is the entity which will perform verification, and resource server is the entity that needs to be secured. So in this case, authorization server is Cognito, because Cognito login UI is going to perform the authentication process, and resource server will be API of our application. And client can be public client or private client, depending on from where we are interacting with authorization server. If we are interacting using front end, it's called public client, because it do not have client secret, and it can be React or Angular or plain JavaScript website. However, if we are interacting using backend like Go, Node.js, then we have client secret also, and that's why we call it private client. In OAuth, grant types are the workflows that we are going to follow to carry out the authentication process. So these are the four type of grant types that are available in Cognito: authorization code, implicit flow, client credential, and refresh token. We will start with authorization code, and here we have flow chart for authorization code grant type. So what happens here is that client, which is our let's suppose client is React application, then it will initiate authorization request and redirect to authorization server, which is Cognito managed login UI. And in that UI, resource owner or user will enter the credentials, username and password. After successfully entering correct username and password, authorization server will return back to the callback URL with authorization code in the URL. So if we have specified localhost 3000 as callback URL, after successful login, we will be redirected back to localhost 3000 with authorization code, and then that authorization code can be used as that authorization code we can use to get access an ID token by again talking back to the token endpoint of authorization server. And once we have this JWT token, we can use these tokens to talk to resource server, which is API of our application. Let's go to Cognito dashboard and see this flow in action. So I will go to the user pool that we created in previous sections. It's my first user pool, and we created one public client also for our user pool, and I will use same client for demo. I will click on login page, and it took me to the this Cognito managed login UI, and here by default it's authorization code flow. And how we know that it is using authorization code workflow or grant type is that here we can see in URL, we can see that we have client ID, which is if I go here, we can see this starting with 7H and ending with 6D. So same client ID is here, and also response type here we see is code. And this is actually grant type as authorization code. So if we want to use grant type as authorization code, we use response type as code. And now I will go ahead and proceed with login. I will enter password and user that we have created. And after that, it will redirect me to this callback URL with authorization code parameter here. Now if I go back to Cognito settings, I can see under login UI section I have specified localhost 3000. I can specify whatever URL I want, and also the code which I got here, it have limited validity of only 3 minutes, which I have specified here. Also the tokens that I will receive, access token, ID token, and refresh tokens, these are the validities for those token. We can increase or reduce here. So now I have ID token. Let's use I have authorization code. Let's use this code to get access and ID token. So here I have created this repo where I will list down all the commands that we will use, and I have added command to get tokens using token endpoint. Here I will paste the command and replace here, replace the values. So looks like here I will correct it later, but for now I will just replace that domain here. So here it should be like we are posting to this Cognito domain, and after this domain we should add /OAuth 2/token, and then in the body this is the header, and in the body we want to add authorization grant type as authorization code, and client ID I can get from here under my client ID. This thing we have seen in URL also, and redirect URI. So redirect URI either I can get from here or from there also, but I will take from here, and update redirect URI here. Last thing we need is authorization code. So here we have authorization code. Authorization code, and done. Now what I can do, I can copy this curl command as it is and use git bash to paste and get the tokens here, but I'm giving the commands in form of curl so that you can easily modify and use it. Also, if you want, you can use Postman and do the actual API calls here. So I will use that curl command which I created and paste it here, and it's imported here. So we can see this is the URL, this is the body, and here we have all details. Let's hit before 3 minutes, otherwise it will not work after that. Here we go. We got ID token, access token, and refresh token. We will go to detail for these tokens. For now, let's just assume that these tokens are valid and we can use them. Now, if I try to hit same URL second time, it's not working anymore because the code which is here, we have used it already. So this was authorization code grant type, and it is a recommended way to do. Now we have one more grant type which is called as implicit flow, and implicit flow is no more recommended to use. Earlier it was recommended to use for front-end applications like React. And what is difference between OAuth this grant type, authorization code grant type, and implicit grant type is that in implicit grant type, once we enter the credential, instead of returning authorization code, all the tokens are returned directly in the URL as part of callback URL. So let's see its demo also. I will go back to my Cognito pool, and here under login pages, and I will go to pool, client, and client, then login pages. Under login pages I need to edit it, and here I will allow implicit grant. Here we can see we have three type of grant. Authorization code is enabled by default. Client, implicit client credential, and implicit client we can enable if required. So I will enable implicit grant and save it. Now I will go to login page, and it's coming, but problem here is that by default it had not taken token response type as implicit, and response type for implicit workflow is token. So if we pass token here, then it will automatically become implicit grant type, and that workflow will happen. And this process is similar for all the other Cognito like products which follow OAuth protocol. So I will hit the URL, and then I will log in with my details, and it will take me to callback URL page. with all the details in the browser URL. So here we see that instead of getting the token authorization code and using token endpoint to get access and ID token, with implicit flow we got all the details as part of this login flow itself. One important thing to mention here is that for me it worked directly, but if you try to do on your own, it's possible that after you save implicit grant and then you try to open the login page and change response type to token, page might give you 400 error for some time. So wait for 5 minutes and retry again, it will work. So I have faced this problem several times. Similarly, if you change callback URL, then also you might face this issue. So just wait for 5 minutes and then retry. Now we are done with authorization code and implicit flow. Another is refresh token, which we are not going to show as see as example, but I will just explain what happens in refresh token grant flow. So here we see that with access token, we get refresh token as well. Okay, here it's not here because as part of implicit, we get only ID and access token, but as part of authorization code, we get a refresh token as well. And that refresh token can be used to get access and ID token again after expiry. So if I see here in Cognito UI, we can see that access token and ID token generally have very less expiry as compared to refresh token. So suppose I requested tokens from token endpoint using authorization code, and my tokens got expired after 60 minutes. So till 5 days, what I can do, instead of doing login again, I can just use this refresh token and keep getting these fresh access and ID token. Also, this refresh token will not be renewed. It will expire after 5 days. So after 5 days, I have to log in again. So benefit of this refresh token is kind of silent login. Instead of taking user to Cognito page again and again and asking them to log in, we can just do the login silently in the background. Another is client credential. So client credential is a bit different. It's allowed only with private clients, and client credential workflow is used when there is no actual client or user interaction is involved. When application itself want to access its own secure APIs, then client credential workflow is invoked. Generally, we can use it as part of test cases. Suppose we are running test case in our server and we want to call some secure APIs, then we can use client credential workflow, and it's also called machine to machine tokens. And to see its workflow, you can search Cognito OAuth and you will get this link, how to use OAuth in Cognito. And here we have again workflow for all type of grant types. Here I will just quickly show client credential grant type. So here we can see there is no much workflow involved. We just pass our credential to Cognito, and Cognito will simply return access token, and it happens generally at backend side only. So these were Cognito supported OAuth 2.0 grant types or workflows. But now we will mainly focus on authorization code grant type and refresh token grant type for integration with our application.